I think we've got another amazing talk now before we move on and get to see all of our speakers in their speaker panel. And I'm really, really happy, and we are all super lucky to be hearing from our next speaker. Angie Jones is going to be giving us a talk called Your Test Lack Vision, Adding Eyes to Your Automation Framework, which I'm super excited to hear. Angie is a senior developer advocate who specializes in test automation. She is the test automation person. In fact, she runs the online learning platform Test Automation University. So any questions, thoughts, or things you might want to know about test automation, Angie is the person to talk to. And she likes to share all of her wealth of knowledge, teaching and speaking at conferences like this one all over the world. So we are very lucky to be having her at React Rally today. Also, very impressive is Angie is a master inventor and has over 25 patented inventions. How cool is that? I want to hear about some of these inventions later. And also in her spare time, which again, I don't know how all of these speakers have like time turners or whatever, but apparently has spare time to also volunteer with Black Girls Code to teach coding workshops to young girls and try to attract more women and minorities into tech communities and the tech world. So just really excited to have Angie here today to speak to us about adding eyes to your automation framework. Ooh. All right, so now we're going to get another musical treat from David, and then Angie will take it away.
Hello, I'm Angie Jones, and I'm a developer advocate at Applitools. I blog about test automation strategies and techniques at angiejones.tech, and you can find me on Twitter at techgirl1908. Today I want to talk about visual validation. But first, let's start off with a little game of WHODUNNIT.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you? Somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Well, did you at least notice the dead man get up and walk away? Probably not, right? Because we all suffer from what's called inattentional blindness. And inattentional blindness is where we have new and unexpected things come into our view and we don't even notice them because we're so focused on the task at hand. And this becomes especially true when we talk about testing our code because we're so focused on that feature that we developed that we're not looking around the application and noticing any other things that could be wrong, right? Now, we usually solve for this by automating our tests because if we automate our tests, then we know those tests are going to take the same steps every time. They're going to make the same verifications every time. So we don't have to worry about forgetting something or missing something, right? But what if I told you that when you're automating your tests, what you're actually doing is scripting in the unintentional blindness? Think about that for a second. Your scripts are only going to validate the things that you explicitly told it to validate. Unless there's some big catastrophe like an exception or something that's preventing the next step from happening, then your tests are really blind. They have more inattentional blindness than we do as the humans. We are more likely to notice a big pink elephant flying across the screen than our automated scripts are, right? Right. And what about the look and feel of our application? So traditional testing frameworks, they all basically look under the covers and they are interrogating the DOM to determine the state of the application. So when you ask a question like, is this text present on the screen? It's not really looking on the screen. It's looking in the DOM to see, is this text in the DOM? And if it is, great, it's going to tell you yes. But what if that text is the same color as the background and the user can't see it? Or what if that text is covered by some other elements? Or what if that text is bleeding off the edge of the page, which is really common when you talk about different viewport sizes and mobile views, right? Here's some examples of some websites that had some visual bugs, because a lot of times people will say to me, oh, Angie, we don't have these types of visual problems. Our app is pretty steady. But I want to show you some examples. Cineworld is the second largest cinema chain in the world, right? So not a little mom and pop shop by any means. They had a visual bug on the page where you store your credit card information. So my question to you is, would you store your credit card information on this page? Because I know we as developers, we see something like this and it feels like a small minor bug, you know, something that we'll get around to, an alignment issue, if you will. But when you think about the impact that this has on conversions, right, on the trust of your application, if I saw this in your application, there's no way that I'm storing my credit card information here. Because my first thought, just like Kim's, is that you did not test your application. If you didn't see this, I know that you didn't test the back end and make sure that my credit card information is actually being stored to my account and that it's safe and secure. The message that you're sending your customers is that you haven't tested your stuff and you're not trustworthy. So I have a theory though. I don't think that they skipped testing. I think they tested this actually. In fact, I think they automated the test. And getting back to what I was saying before, this is interrogating the DOM. So is the yes label present? Why, yes, of course. Is the no label present? There it is. Are those two radio buttons there? They sure are. Ship it, right? Is what our tests are telling us, because it's not looking at the surface. Let's look at another one. So this is OpenTable. OpenTable is an app where you can make reservations at restaurants. So I used to live in North Carolina, famous for barbecue, and I went back a couple of years ago, and I wanted to catch up with some of my friends. So The Pit is my favorite barbecue restaurant in North Carolina, so if you are there, definitely check that out. But anyway, I went on here, and I wanted to make a reservation for 7 people, and it showed me some available time, so I went ahead and clicked on the 7 o'clock slot, and this modal appeared. And it took me a little minute to figure out, like, what am I supposed to do here? Because there's nothing centered here. So as I began to look around, and I did notice these 2 select buttons in this upper right corner here. But I was even more confused at that point because, I mean, these 2 select buttons are not aligned, for one. I don't know what I'm selecting because there's no text present here. You know, it's just really odd. So I did what any of you would do. I opened Chrome DevTools and I began to poke around the DOM to try to figure out what are these buttons, right? And in doing so, I saw that the labels actually were here on the screen. They were just over here as far away from the buttons as possible, right? So fortunately, because I saw that, I was able to make my reservation, but I couldn't help but wonder how many people just canceled out of this, you know? Most people are not engineers. They don't know anything about Chrome DevTools or how to dig through the DOM to figure out how to use your application. And so think about the business that's being lost here, right? For example, I'm meeting with my friends. We haven't seen each other in a while. It's 7 of us. We're going to order a lot of food and a lot of drinks and appetizers and the works. To miss out on this is big, and this is one example, right? How many of these customers have they missed out on in a given day? So it's not good for the app. But again, think about your automated tests. The buttons are there. Technically, this stuff works. It's functional, and in looking in the DOM, like the tests do, it's able to figure things out and navigate. But as a human being, not so much. So it'd be really hard to detect this bug because the tests are passing. Now, these aren't just one-offs, right? This happens to your favorite tech companies as well. such as Amazon. So this is their mobile view, and someone was going to not only just buy a product, but they wanted to buy multiple quantities of this product. And so they selected the drop down, the select menu, hoping that they would be able to select their quantity. And as you can see, it's off the edge of the screen, right? So this makes it really difficult for your users to deal with. This is at the point of sale, right? And at the point where someone is ready to spend even more money, like multiply the amount of money that they are going to spend, right? So you don't want your bugs here. This is Facebook in their marketplace, also point of sale, right? So someone is going here, they might want to buy some things, automatically you're turned off. Look at this text over here on the side of the page. I mean, it just all looks really bad, and it doesn't make me want to spend any money at all. Instagram, this is one of my favorite ones because this is sponsored content, meaning someone paid to have their advertisement show up like this. Not good, right? Where's the picture? All of the text is just overlapping. No one can interact with this. Think about this. Instagram is going to have to refund this paying customer their money back. And not only that, again, with the trust, if this happened to me, I wouldn't want to have my sponsored content here. Twitter. Right? So you open your app and it looks like this. What do? You're going to close it right back. You cannot function like this, right? Even Google. Now, this one isn't that big a deal, and I almost didn't put it in my slides, but I got to thinking about this. These Google engineers make a lot of money, you know? So now you have to take some highly paid engineer from innovating new features to go and fix this button text. Like, this is a waste of time and waste of money, but this is a point of sale, so it needs to be right. All of the examples I showed you cost the company money, and these were not hard examples to find because it's everywhere, and it's probably in your app as well. The great news is you don't have to live like this anymore, people, okay? Visual validation can be automated. So what is visual validation? And we're going to call it visual testing. That rolls off the tongue a little easier. So visual testing is where you have a screenshot of your application taken when it's in its golden state, meaning everything looks beautiful. I'm looking at it with my own human eyes, and yeah, it looks great. Okay, so you save this off, and then on all of your regression runs, a new image is captured, and that image is compared to the baseline image to determine if there are any differences. Now, visual validation isn't entirely new. In fact, it's been around for a while, but the techniques that we were using are not great for testing, right, as an industry. So most of the solutions out there are using pixel-to-pixel comparison, and this can be really flaky. It's not meant for testing applications. And let me show you what I mean. So this top picture is a picture of our application when it's in the state that we like, right? And then on a regression run, that's the bottom picture. Now, the test failed, and the build is broken, and we are alerted about it. And we see that this is the issue. So who can see why this may have failed? The reason is because on the second image, the Google search button here is bolded. Well, that happens when you hover over this button. Again, this is automated. These are automated tests. So if you're not running headless, and it just so happens that the cursor lands right here sometimes, then now you're in a pickle and you have your builds breaking. So now you're stuck trying to write code that makes sure that the mouse isn't right here over the button, which no one wants to write this kind of code, right? Here's another one. Why is this one failing? Yep, because the cursor behind the word bad is here, but it's not there. Well, cursors blink, people. So if it happened to take the picture when the cursor was solid, and then on any regression runs, it happened to take the picture at the millisecond it was not solid, the test breaks. So this is really, really annoying, right? This is where pixel-to-pixel testing becomes a headache more than a help. So fortunately, Aptitude has come out with a new way to do this. Instead of using pixel-to-pixel comparison, it uses machine learning to only highlight the differences that we care about as human beings, the things that we would notice. So here's another game, Spot the Difference, but you all don't get to play because you let the dead man walk in the first game, right? So I'll play this one for you. So this Spot the Difference game, I ran it through two techniques. I ran it through pixel-to-pixel visual testing, and then I ran it through the machine learning visual testing because I wanted to get a sense of how they detect differences and how different they are from one another. When I ran it through the pixel-to-pixel comparison, this is what I got. So it highlighted everything. It's super, super sensitive. So any little white space shifts and things like that got highlighted. So this is what I mean about this is not made for testing, right? It's not made for that. I ran it through the machine learning and voila. Now, okay, now we're getting to how I would perform this check as a human being, okay? So that's the magic of it. Now let's go ahead and add it to an existing code base. I want to show it to you in action. So I'm going to use Cypress with Amplitudes for the visual testing, but know that Amplitudes has SDKs for like all of the different languages pretty much, and different testing frameworks. So if you use something different than Cypress, then they have you covered. All right. Okay, so here's the application that we're going to test. It's just a single page application with 8 of my favorite books about testing. And you can filter these books by author or by title. For example, if I were to put in the word test, then I see all of the books that have test in the title. If I were to put in Lisa, I see the book that has Lisa Crispin as the author. So that's the entire application, okay? So we have a couple of tests for this. Let's have a look at those. All right, so we have our Cypress test here, and we're basically performing 2 tests. One where we're searching for one book with the exact title of Agile testing, and one where we're searching for multiple books by putting in some subtext. Okay, so let's look at the first test. All right, so we say we want the title Agile testing. We're going to search for this title. We're going to make sure that there's only one book that's visible after we search for that title. And we're going to make sure that when we search for that book, the one that is visible is actually the right title. Okay. And then the second test, we are going to set the array of all of the books that we're expecting. We're going to search for this word test. We're going to make sure that all of the books in the array, at least it's the same quantity. And then we're going to make sure that all of the titles actually match. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this as is. All right. So let's open the terminal and we're going to say Cypress open. Okay. And this is, if you haven't used Cypress, it's pretty cool. Definitely should try it out. All right, so it opens this GUI and it has our test here and starts running, and looks like everything is green and has passed. So very good here. All right, so let's go back to our test and let's mess things up a bit. Okay, so it was running this one. This is the one that's set to only, and it was running this one and it made sure that the books were there, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is let's go into the CSS file. And let's just start adding a little bit of code here. Let's say I'm going to add a little bouncy effect to my stuff, right? So I'm just going to add this bit of code and let's just see what happens, right? We check it in because we have tests, right? So we can do whatever we want to do and no one can tell us a thing. All right, so let's run this again. And notice here, these books are flipped upside down and yet this test still passed. Why? Because of that unintentional blindness I was telling you about, right? So what we said in our test is make sure that there are 5 books. Yep, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make sure that each of the books have a certain title. Yep, they sure do. They all have a title. So this passes, and there's this unintentional blindness where it misses the fact that these books are actually upside down. With one line of CSS, I have literally flipped this application on its head, which is not good. So let's go ahead and add the visual testing here to see if it catches it. All right. So I'm actually going to comment this out because remember we need a baseline with our visual testing to be able to capture it in its great state. All right. And let's go ahead and add the visual testing pieces. So we're going to go up here to this before each. And after we navigate, we're going to do this sigh and we're going to say eyes open. So that's the Amplitudes API. It allows us to open our eyes because we're going to do some visual testing here. So inside of here, I just want to give it the application name. So we'll say Automation Bookstore. Okay. All right. So we tell it to open the eyes. Also, when you sign up for your free accounts, you get an API key. So with that API key, I've stored it as an environment variable. So Amplitudes is automatically going to pick that up. Let's also go ahead and add an after each because we want to close this once it's done. So in here, we're just going to say side.eyes closed. So after the test, just go ahead and close your eyes, okay? All right. And now to add the visual parts to the test themselves. So here, we're just going to say side.eyes check window. And that's the check. This will do the whole visual shebang. So it will take the the picture of the application and it's going to store it and all that jazz. I don't have to write any of that code. In fact, I can actually start deleting some code here, which is like my favorite thing to do. So when I say check the window, again, this is taking a picture and comparing a picture. And if you think about comparing a picture, think about how many more assertions you're getting there, right? It's almost like a picture is worth 1,000 assertions, because that picture is going to make sure that all of these titles are in the picture. So I no longer need this assertion. It's going to make sure that this number of books is correct. If there's one more or one less, it'll recognize that. So I don't need to check for this anymore, which means I don't need this array. Oh my God, look at me just deleting stuff. And I don't need this variable anymore because I'm only using it one time. So now look at my test. Look at that. It went from gaboom to 2 lines, okay? All right, let's run it. All right, so we say, go ahead and run again. Okay, so we see that it's making the check calls. So what this is doing now, it's taking that picture like I told you, and it's sending it up to the Applitude's cloud so that I don't have to do anything. I don't have to take the picture myself. I don't have to store this on some server or on my local disk or anything like that. All of this is being stored in the cloud for us, okay? And we see here that the test has stopped and everything is fine. I see what it looks like. It looks great to me. So I don't have to do anything at all, really. But I know you're wondering what happened and everything in the background. So I'm going to take you over to the Applitude's dashboard so that you can see the image. But know that this is an optional step. We didn't have to do this. We're technically done, right? But I'm going to take you over here because I know you're curious. All right. So I'm over here in the Applitude's dashboard. Don't mind all this stuff. This is old stuff. But here is my new Cypress test. And notice here, it's added this. And I see the picture. Since this is the first picture, there's no baseline to compare it to. So when this runs again, this is going to become the baseline. Notice it's marked as passed and everything like that. I technically don't have to do anything at all. I only brought you here to see it. All right. All right, let's go back and mess the app up again, and let's see if the visual testing will catch those issues. Okay, so back to our CSS file, and we're going to uncomment out the flip, and we'll go back to Cypress now. All right, so we're going to run this again, and the app is upside down, correct? So yes, now it's taking another picture. So this is now becoming the regression run, and it has its baseline. So it's comparing those 2 images to determine if there are any differences. And notice here, the test has failed, and we indeed see that we have some differences. All right, so I refresh this, and now I have this new test, and it's marked as unresolved. So I come in here, and notice this is my baseline now on the left, and this is the regression run on the right, and it has basically highlighted all of these things you see here. It's highlighted all of these things for me to let me know what has changed. So I can clearly see, yes, this is indeed a bug, right? So what I will do is I'm going to just mark this as failed by pushing this thumbs down button, and now this is technically marked as failed. I could do other things like, I can make the bug report right here in the dashboard. So I can say, what on earth? Flipped on the head, right? And I can create this. And so with that, I can make any other comments I wanted to. I could even associate this with Jira tickets and stuff like that. So you can get really fancy here. Now, let's talk about some pros and cons of using this approach for testing, right? So I don't want to just give you something and say that it's all magic and run with it. No, that's not the case. The pros are, that unintentional blindness is now gone away, because not only is it verifying the things that I said, because remember, I only had 2 assertions. I wanted to make sure that the number of books show up is correct. So 5, and I also wanted to make sure that each of those titles were listed as the book. But there's so much more on this screen, right? What about the authors? What about the prices? What about the book's cover, which is really important? People always search and they're kind of glancing by the visuals, right? What about this stuff, the title and all of that? Now, I might have gotten myself too far, and that's where the con comes in, because not only is it verifying what I need verified, but it's verifying every single thing that is captured in this image. And it may be things that I don't really care about, right? For example, if this title of the page changes, that's not relevant to this particular test. So those are your pros and cons, and it's basically the same thing. The pro is that it verifies everything. The con is that it verifies everything, right? So there are some ways to get around this because this API is really, really flexible, right? So it offers some additional support. I could do things like, for example, I can say ignore certain regions of this page. So I can say, okay, this I don't care about. Don't worry about verifying this. And once I set this region, then every time a regression run happens, it will not consider that portion of the page. So that's really helpful for things like dates or timestamps or just portions of the page you legit do not care about and don't want verified, okay? All right, so we ran the one that was doing the 5 books. Let's look at this one that's only doing the 1 book. Okay, so this is a good example. I just care about this 1 book. That's the only thing that I really want verified. So how might I do that? All right, so we're still going to say eyes check window, but we can specify some arguments here. So I can specify a target, and I'm going to say region, meaning there's only a certain region of this page that I want you to capture, and then you give it a selector. And that selector would be basically like a CSS selector. So I know the ID of this is PID3. So I'm going to say this is the book that I want you to capture, right? And again, I can get rid of code here because this stuff is being automatically verified. And again, I have me a quick little test. Think about how quick this is going to be to write your test. All right, so did we fix the CSS? No. All right, so our CSS is fixed and we just want to capture this one, right? So let's go to Cypress. All right, we're back at Cypress and let's run this again and hopefully it's just, yeah. So we just have the 1 book this time. So, all right, it's not going to get this whole page. It's essentially going to just find that element, the PID3 element, and it's going to take a picture of that element, which is done. All right, so let's go, I guess we'll go to the dashboard, but we don't have to, but we'll go. All right, so we get over here and we see we have a new test and we see that it's only captured the book, not the entire page, which is good. You verify what you care about on the page, so you can do that for any portion of the page, right? Now, let's talk about the pros and cons. The pro, of course, is that I've narrowed the scope of this test. I'm only verifying what I care about. However, the con is that I've now reintroduced the unintentional blindness back into our test. In fact, let me show you this. So take a look at that picture, memorize it. All right, so I want to come back here and let's say that I typed in that agile testing like I just did and we saw that it was working, but in some future release I break this. Now I type in agile testing and filter does not work at all, meaning none of these books have actually been filtered away. Is this going to pass or is this going to fail? Well, remember what we told the smart bots to do. We said find this element on the page and verify that it's beautiful. And what it's going to do is find this element on the page and verify that it's beautiful. And guess what? This element looks exactly like the baseline element. So this test would pass, even though filter is all the way broken. So you have to be careful with this stuff, right? We sometimes think that machine learning is just so powerful and all-knowing. No, 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 no. You, the engineer, you are in control, right? You are in control. You still have to think. So if I'm going to narrow my scope the way that I did, then my test needs to be a little bit smarter. It's nothing wrong with narrowing the scope. You just have to compensate for this. So let's go back over here to our test and I can couple this. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. I don't have to just say do my visual test. I can say, yeah, do my visual test, but also let's add that thing back. So I don't remember what I had, so we're going to do some undos. Here we go. All right, so I want to keep this, and then maybe I also want to validate that the number of books is just 1, okay? So I'm coupling it. I have a functional test, and I also have this visual test. And okay, a little bit longer than my 2 lines, but this is now becomes very powerful. So I still get to have my cake and eat it too. I'm just verifying this portion of the page, but I'm also making sure that there's nothing goofy that has occurred here. So it's okay to mix and match. Now, a question that I often get from people is, what about if I have dynamic content? Now, surely that won't work. Yes, with Applitools it will. Okay, so I'm going to write a new test. Okay, so inside of here, we're not even going to do a search or anything. We just want the books as they are. So we'll say eyes check window. All right, so I'm just going to run this so that we can get our baseline image captured. Okay, all right. So again, taking a picture, this is a brand new test, and then it's going to send this up to the server, and that'll be our baseline image. All right, now our baseline image is captured. Now I'm going to go and I want to switch the order of a couple of these books. So I'm going to go in this products.js file, and let's just take any of these and we're just going to swap the order out. Now, of course, if I run this right now, it's going to fail, right? Because the books are out of order. But I want to use this dynamic content, so I just need to add one more line to this eyes open command. So I can use what's called a match level. And the match level I want to use is layout. Now, match levels are basically the algorithms that eyes is using to do the comparison. So before we didn't have match level specified, so it was using the strict one by default. So strict, we saw how that worked. There are 3 others. The other one is called exact. That one does pixel to pixel comparison. Remember, I already told you pixel to pixel comparison is not the business. Do not use that one. Act like it doesn't even exist. The next one is called content. This one goes colorblind, and it basically just verifies your application's content and not the color. So this is great for cases where the colors may change or vary. You know, maybe you allow your customers to personalize their profile color or something like that. So it only looks at the content, not the color. And then this final one is called layout, and this one verifies the page structurally, not the content of the page. All right, so let's run this one. So we run this test again, and the orders of the books have changed. I think it was these 2 books, so this has changed. And so machine learning is doing something different now. It is actually looking at this and trying to detect a pattern on this page. It is making sure that the page stays in that pattern no matter what the content is. This is good for things like news sites or Twitter that I worked on and stuff like that. All right, so we come here and basically, if you look at these 2 books, it was Advanced Selenium followed by Cucumber. This one is Cucumber followed by Advanced Selenium. And this is passed because it is using this layout method, which specifies here. Now, you can actually view this. You can preview it in another match level. So these are the 4 match levels I was telling you about. So if I said, let me see this in strict, which is the default, notice it would have caught that these 2 books are indeed different. But since we used the layout one, it was able to say, yeah, structurally this is fine. Now, pros and cons. Of course, the pro is that it's very flexible. I can have these books in any order. If I had other types of sites, this would be very, very helpful. The con of this is that it doesn't verify the content at all. So when I switch these 2 books, let's say I accidentally switch some of the information about the book, like maybe the authors still were messed up or something like that, none of that would get caught because it's not verifying the content of the page. Again, you the human, use your brain, right? I do not use this for my end-all be-all testing. I use the layout mode for things like smoke tests. So I just want to make sure the application is up and running before I continue on with more thorough tests. I use it for if I'm not actually verifying the data on the page, like I just don't want to. I want to verify stuff on the back end, maybe using an API or database or something like that. Then I can verify that stuff on the back end and just make sure that visually my page looks okay. All right, so those are some use cases for using layout mode. There's one more thing I want to show you, and that's how you can utilize this to do cross-platform testing, right? So cross-platform testing, I don't know if any of you have had to do it, especially the automation of it is not fun to do at all. As you have like different viewport sizes, especially, you're needing to capture these different elements. You're needing a bunch of conditional statements for things like, okay, if it's in this viewport, then I'm expecting there to be a hamburger menu, and I have to click that before getting to the menu item that I want. You know what I mean? So it's just not a fun activity. What's worse about it all is that you don't really get your bang for the buck. So you test across all of these different platforms and browsers and devices only to still have your customers complain about these bugs. And you wonder, how did you miss them? Well, that's because most cross-platform bugs are actually visual bugs. They're not really functional bugs. They're things because your viewport size has changed, your app has gone wonky, right? So that's why you need the visual testing for this. So Applitools has come up with the Ultrafast Grid, which is amazing, right? So the way this works is you write your test for one viewport. You don't need all of that conditional logic and stuff anymore. You write it for whatever. Let's say just Chrome desktop. I write my test. And, I do all of my steps of execution until I get to the verification point. When I get to the verification point, I do that eyes.check window. But if I give it a list of the configurations that I want to test against, what eyes is going to do is when it does its check, it's going to also grab the state of my application. It's going to blast that across all of the configurations that I've specified. And then it's going to make sure that my app looks okay in those configurations. So I don't need to download IE or Edge or, Safari. I don't need to have all of these, this device farm with all of these different mobile phones and iPads and stuff. I don't need any of that. I got my Chrome. I say, Amplitudes run this for me across all of those different things, and it will take care of that stuff for me. So here's what it looks like in Cypress. Basically, you're just giving it what browsers you want and what dimensions you would like. And then if there's any mobile phones you want landscape and portrait, not a problem. We got you. Okay. So you would just add this. In fact, I can add it here. I think I have the text. Yeah. So I'll show you where you put this right here. So I'm going to take this layout out. We're not going to use that anymore, but we can just plop that right there. And now I don't have to do anything different with my test. You saw my test basically just says, search and check the window. Now, when I run this test, it's going to run it across all of these configurations. So I guess you probably want to see it, huh? So let's do this one. And let's go to Cypress. All right, so it's going to run all of this. Notice I don't see anything different here. All of this stuff is just running in the cloud, and it's running in parallel. So it makes it pretty fast, and it doesn't matter if I had one test or if I had 10 different tests, then they will all take the same amount of time since it's running in parallel. So that's done. Let's go ahead and let's look at it in the dashboard. All right, so notice here, voila, all of these tests have now run. So I already had the one that was Chrome desktop. Remember, we ran that earlier today, but now all of these are new. So I'm adding new platforms. I don't have to look at my code or anything. I just added to that array, and I'll walk you through these pictures. And so we can see how our app would look on these different mobile devices. Now, I won't lie, I come over here the first time because I want to make sure everything looks good and to my liking. And once I verify that one time, I'm good to go. This also works for component level testing. So if you are making components and maybe storing them in Storybook, then you can use the visual testing for your components. So this becomes like almost like unit testing at the component level, right? So as opposed to your entire application, you can verify those different components. It's very simple. You run a simple command and it verifies all of your Storybook components as well. And that works for Angular, for Vue, and for React. So there you have it, people. That is visual testing in a nutshell. Again, I'm Angie Jones, and you can find me at angiejones.tech or on Twitter at techgirl1908. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, what an amazing talk by Angie. I mean, gosh, talk about perfectly mixing the practical code applications, the humor, the high level understanding of how visual testing can work for us. And as always, I think none of us are going to walk away today without forgetting the phrase, or with forgetting the phrase, pixel to pixel. We say no pixel to pixel. We know this now.